Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever you are in the world. This is our fifth podcast. Today I'm with Gary, Ivan, and Nestor. Nestor is our guest speaker today. Nestor is a former MA TESOL student at the University of Manchester. I'm proud to say that we did our MA TESOL together and we managed to go from beginning to end. Yeah, same year and everything. And well, he's going to be talking about his experience with concordancing. But we're going to start talking about what we learned this week, where we think you should be in your mind regarding the content materials, any other ideas, key points that we think that you need to take away from today's and this week's actually learning. So this week we talked about concordancy. And why do we need concordancy at this point in our lives? That's a good question.
For me, I think I sort of emphasize this really in the sessions, but maybe people miss these things. I mean, for me, it's about understanding where language comes from, and it's a different way of looking at language learning. So it's a form of exploratory language learning. So it illustrates that. It illustrates doing your own investigation, your own research into language learning, so data-driven learning. But also, just to emphasize the impact that the whole collection of corpora and concordancing has had on the construction of textbook materials, dictionaries, general analysis of language. So there's a whole subdivision of applied linguistics called corpus linguistics, that exactly it explores corpora, how to investigate these different collections of language, and collections like the British National Corpus or the Cambridge Spoken English Corpus. I mean, they're now combined. The Brown Corpus, which is a US corpus, and lots of others, and then you take it on into your own exploration. So the point of AntConch is that you as classroom teacher, or ultimately you as learner, can build your corpus and use this as a basis of your own learning processes. So, it's particularly relevant in English for specific purposes, because there is often not a lot of material available in those subject areas. So if you're an aeronautical engineer or you're teaching, so in some parts of the world, China's a good example, there's a lot of people who teach English for specific purposes in very narrow, very context. It's also very true in some of in the Czech Republic, in places like Slovenia, quite a lot of European countries. There's a lot of this specific purposes language going on. So people go and study, at technical colleges, and they're still expected to learn English. And so for a teacher, that's quite daunting. So the ability to collect a corpus that they can use to answer the questions that students inevitably ask about, well, how do you use this in language, or to look at the structures, the way that people, because different disciplines might write their write articles or talk about things in certain kinds of ways. So that's the point. So it's partly about making sure people are aware of it because it's got a research angle. It's about thinking about its function, in the classroom, but ultimately also it's about, people can use it as a way of supporting their own language development. So, you create that autonomous learner that we were talking about earlier on in the course.
And the fact that these programs are available as well for any person out there who's interested in exploring the language, that's again promotes that autonomy that you were talking about. Sure. And I'm interested now to know, and then probably at this point we can bring Nestor's experience. Nestor, as I said before, he did the MA TESOL in 2013, 2014. And now you're doing a PhD. So what was your learning from about concordancing, and did you take this learning anywhere else?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation. Actually, it was while I was attending Gary's course unit that I came across this idea of data-driven learning. Back then, I was teaching English for translation purposes. I mean, in translation training programs. It is some sort of English for specific purposes in a way, because you need to align the way you teach language with what translators is going to do in the future. So I realized the affordances that Gary very well described, and my thesis was about basically that, how we could take this into translation training programs so that we can foster students' autonomy, which is actually a very important thing, since translators, after they part of what translators do involves that sort of autonomous research. Instead of they look for information sources, genres, and then based on that, they actually face and engage with the text that they have to translate. So what I did was that I tried to incorporate this with my colleagues. I don't know if students at the MA class had the opportunity to engage with AntConch, but probably one of the main challenges that he has is that it can be a bit repetitive at times. So in order to address the issue of being repetitive, or that it's a bit dull as in the terms that it looks, we came up with the idea of using TV series that students watch, online TV series. And what we did was that we went to a website where we could download the transcripts for free. And we created a corpus based on the series that students say that they like the most. And we analyzed several things in course units, for instance, reported speech. In a course unit that dealt with descriptive grammar, we analyzed noun phrases and verb phrases, particularly collocations. That was particularly useful. Students really enjoyed that. And the fact that it was on something that they were so familiar with actually gave this other dimension that made it a bit more meaningful. They were also able to see how this aligned with the final goal that was basically that they would become translators after they would finish the course. So it has several affordances that can be used for, as Gary said, for specific purposes.
And the fact that you're using their experience of what they like, TV shows, Sherlock Holmes, let's have a look at the transcript, let's have a look at this. I think, having them engaging with the materials from their own meaningful ways of, seeing the world or liking the language. I think that's very, very interesting.
Yes. We came up with that idea based on what you said. I think that in one of your previous podcasts about the learning outcomes and also students' needs. So we try to incorporate those things as well. Like, what were a student expecting from the course unit? How they would see that would benefit them. And that's how we came up with the idea of using that as a sort of input for the corpus. And now what we're doing is that we're trying to align the translation course units and the language course units by means of this corpora. We are coming up with new corpora. Let's say, for instance, if they're translating medicine in the translation course unit, then we're dealing with, clinical trials. And we have created available, those which are open access. We have created a corpus that deals with that. And so kind of students explore how that particular genre operates, how language operates there, and they can use that as they approach text and when translating.
That's very interesting, because in class we were talking about, teachers creating their own corpus as well. But how, I'm interested in the challenges as well when you're looking out there and, as you said, grab a piece of corpus from a TV series of clinical, more technical. How are there any challenges, or do you think let's create it ourselves?
Well, there are some challenges. Interestingly, when you look at the literature, at the very beginning, they would say that if the corpus was way too big, students would get confused, right? But what we found while carrying out this research is when the corpus is relatively small, students tend to not find suffice evidence to whatever they're looking for. So I don't know, I want to look up this, and they find nothing. So they start then getting frustrated because they try to find something, but they can't. So we created a larger corpus. We are now at around 14 million words. And it has allowed us to have enough so that students are not daunted by the amount of things that they find, but they are also able to find at least one example that, I don't know if it reflects everything, but at least something that they found. And I think that it has a positive effect on the self-efficacy beliefs as they actually engage with the software. I think that one of the most critical things is not just corpora construction, but training students in actually engaging with the software, because the software allows you to do many things, but if you don't know how to use it, it's self-intuitive until a certain point, but then there are other things that they can do. They can have, let's say, this plot map where they can see within a text how many, the frequency of certain elements or certain patterns within the whole text. And those things need to be graded throughout the course. I think that we also discussed that at the very beginning of Gary's course unit when we said that, I think it was Bax who said that you can just rush these things and think that everybody will get them and find them as interesting as you. And because if you rush things and you don't do proper training, people will then find them overwhelming and probably discard them, although they're very good. So we take our time, we try to graduate that in the process. It's not only exploring certain language patterns, but also grading what they can do with the corpus so that they can transit from this teacher-led figure that they are accustomed to this autonomous learner that we want to develop.
I mean, just to comment on that issue of corpus construction, I mean, it is a well-known issue in corpus linguistics that you need a fairly sizable corpus to make it work, because exactly, if you're looking for fairly specialist vocabulary, the chances of finding that are quite slim, and you might find a very few number of examples. I mean, the opposite is the case with grammatical items, where of course you get thousands of them, but you show people how to limit their searches. So I mean, I think it's less of a problem when you're looking at specialist material, because of course if you're looking in a certain kind of genre or a certain subject area, then it's much more likely that you're going to get more more examples of how a piece of language is being used. And I think that's something to bear in mind. I mean, that's why in some ways it's easier to start in that sort of space rather than starting in the general space. And the other issue, the other kind of key issue that is problematic, and certainly the case with the big corpora that are available online, is that they're out of date. So the natural thing is to think, oh, let's use something like Google, and we did talk about that in the class. I mean, it's possible to use Google in that kind of way for general language, but you have to be very careful, because you're not sure of the provenance of the language. But when it comes to sort of looking at a sort of specific subject specific ESP type material, then of course if you search for those on the internet, you're not going to find that many examples. So concentrating that material into a corpus is the way to go. And I think you're absolutely right about training. And one of the things I always worry about on this course, and I said that in one of the sessions earlier, that we are showing you the peaks of these ideas. So we've just skated over a whole discipline in 2 hours or 3 hours maybe. We've skated over the top of the discipline of corpus linguistics in 3 hours. I mean, people spend their whole their whole academic lives exploring the use of one piece of language, and they collect an enormous corpus to enable them to do that. Or not one piece, that's a bit of an exaggeration, but you know, they might spend their life exploring, you know, I don't know, verb usages or something like that. So, you know, somebody like Flowerdew, who I've mentioned, I mean, he's focused very much around, you know, looking at corpora, collecting corpus, you know, texts of language to enable him to explore academic language, and you know, that's essentially what his work has been. So
I think the beauty, I mean, yes, you mentioned it's very, very introductory unit to concordancing, but there's a lot of potential, and we can see now with Nestor's experience, you know, as he went into mode, I love this, I like this, I'll take it for dissertation, and then do research in that. I think that's, you know, shows the value as well of
absolutely. So that's the point, you know, that, you know, you might, I mean, actually, one of the students was asking before we got going, was asking about, you know, sort of maybe she should take this idea on and use it as a dissertation in order to actually, you know, sort of in a way force her to do the kinds of things to kind of get over her, you know, to actually make her sort of do stuff. And we were talking about that at the beginning, and I think that's important. You know, you pick up on something, you can't manage everything. It's a big menu of items. We have 11 different sessions on different subject areas, and we only really kind of, you know, we just scratch at the surface, and that's what it's supposed to be. Here is a snapshot of this topic area. Concordancing, corpora is a snapshot of those kinds of ideas, and it's great to see that someone has, you know, got excited by it and gone on and developed it in the way that Nestor has. So that's what the course is about, sort of showing you the peaks. So hopefully you'll dig down and find, you know, the gold, you know, in the mountain, I suppose, you know, to push metaphors too far, probably.
Can I add a little bit on that? My short piece of advice to the MS students would be to make the most out of the assignment that you give at the very end of the course unit, because that is actually what allows you to actually zoom into whatever area you want to deal with, and then manage to see much more of it and see the potential that it has. So making the most out of that assignment is, to me, was critical. That was the aligning point, that so this has potential, and this is actually something that I could develop well into a dissertation later on.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you for that, Nestor. That's useful advice to people as we're beginning to move into assignment mode. So
yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for your time. Thank you, Nestor. Thank you, Gary. Thank you, Johan. I hope you know, we can meet again sometime, maybe in a bigger, you know, conference presentation or something. We can think about doing something to know more about what you've done, and thank you very much for being with us today.
Oh, pleasure.
Thank you, Nestor.
See you soon, everybody. Thanks for listening, and see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.